Hi, I'm Peter Clines, and in the before time, I ran the Writers Coffeehouse at Dark Delicacies in Burbank, California. Now that we're all social distancing, some friends and I are going to try and answer your writing questions here online. So ask away. Anyway, thank you all for joining in for our latest Cyber Coffeehouse, Writers Cyber House, whatever. Today's question is a short, simple question from Fred. How do you start / outline a book? Which I think is one of those very simple and yet scarily gigantic questions.
Yes.
It kind of is based on whether or not you actually outline a book. So we should probably toss that caveat in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually good. I mean, question it off. How many of us outline and to what extent?
I'm an outliner. Yeah.
Almost not at all.
Really?
Okay, we've got both sides.
Yeah.
That's great.
But that's it. I mean, I know I've actually changed because I think my first 4 books I did not outline at all,
Mm-hmm.
and just wrote. And then somewhere around, I think it was around Exile or maybe Expurgatory was when I started going, okay, I should have. I mean, I was kind of outlining,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of like I knew. Here's some characters, here's 3-4 cool story beats kind of in order. But I don't think it was until Expurgatory or Exile that I really sat down and said, okay, I need to have a bit more of a beat sheet or something here.
Yeah.
Don't laugh at me.
No. I don't think it's bad. I've done a different arc, which is I didn't outline it all. Then I started outlining a little bit, and now I'm back to not outlining at all. I don't know why. Partly because after you write enough, I feel like after writing, I was like, I'll figure it out. Now that doesn't mean sometimes it takes longer than it should, but I'm a big believer in the rewrite. So I'm like, whatever. If it doesn't work, I'll fix it later. So that's
in all fairness, that's what I'm doing now. After Terminus and Dead Moon, like my last 3 books had massive outlines, and this one I wrote 3 paragraphs as my what if I wrote about this, and just went nuts. And
I'm a pretty heavy outliner. I think that's just kind of how I operate, though. So yeah, pretty much when I get the idea of a story, I think about it, I decide what I want to do. But then before I really sit down and start writing, I get like, I do like a full beat by beat outline that generally can be between 15 to 20 pages of just this happens and this happens. I think I do it because I'm not as heavy a rewriter. So using the outline allows me to really go through and make sure all my story beats line up and make sure my timeline lines up, and also notice if like, oh, okay, there's a flag there, there needs to be something there. Are we getting like feedback on this?
I'm not sure.
Is this sounding okay to everyone?
I was sounding something, but I wasn't sure if somebody just had something in the background.
Like a crackle or something. I don't know. So yeah. So I do that, I think, because if I want to rearrange stuff, I find it easier to do it on the outline portion. You know, before I'm like in like up to my elbows in story where it's just like, oh shit, now I got to move 5 chapters, or oh no, oh that didn't work at all. Oh God, no one's got a motivation anymore to do the thing. Oh no.
Which in all fairness, I do
I get
all
so worried
the time.
about that stuff. Yeah. So I run into those things, but I'm running into them when it's still just like paragraph by paragraph, like bullet points of, okay, now they're going to go here. Okay, now they're going to go here. Okay, this motivates X to go here. Okay, that then allows this to do that to find the thing. So, but that's just how I function, I think.
There's a lot of wisdom in that one, because it's that idea of not wanting to waste time later in some sense of the word for yourself. You don't want to waste time.
In a sense, yeah.
I kind of have a slightly different solution, but to the same problem. I shouldn't say waste time, because rewriting is not wasting time. Everybody has to rewrite, but it's how much productive effort each writer can put into rewriting. And some writers can be ridiculously productive when they do a second or a third rewrite. I am not productive on that second and third and fourth rewrite. I'm making the novel worse by that point. So I try and be as efficient as possible in the first couple rounds. I'm also a bit of a pantser though. So how do I solve the problem of not really being a detailed outliner, but also not having to do so many rewrites later on? And the solution I've got is I'll come up with an idea, a couple paragraphs, usually the first chapter or so. And then I'll have a picture or an image of a handful of scenes that I think are really going to work and are kind of like the arcs of those beats that I need to hit in the novel that's going to drive it forward and such. And then often I'll write the ending and like an epilogue. And those will be my most fleshed out parts of the book. And then I go and I fill in.
Then you bridge,
Then I bridge it all together. So it gives me, it all changes, but it at least gives me a target.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will agree. It's all about how the process works, because I do end up writing a lot of stuff that doesn't make it in the book, and a lot of dead ends that get cut out. It's just my process. And you're right, at times it can be very frustrating to be like, oh, here's 50 pages that don't go in the book. Here's 30 pages that there's one thing in the 30 pages that I need. I got to get rid of everything else. So, I mean, I just accept it as part of my process. And I think we'll all agree. I think every writing advice will always give you what works for your process. If you find yourself discouraged because you've written 50 pages that aren't in the book, well, don't do that anymore. Find a way to avoid that. If you find that writing outlines makes you less creative and makes you feel like you're not working hard enough, I mean, you don't feel excited about it, then don't do that. And I think ultimately, to me, it's the great thing about writing, and I said this before, is it doesn't really matter how you got there. It matters with the book, you know? It's like, if I made this joke about, like, if I'm building a house and I forget the basement, I can't fix it. You know, it's like, oh, I forgot to put the toilets. Oh, now there's no, the great thing about writing, if you do your rewrites and you do it right, nobody sees all the, like, oh yeah, I was about halfway through before I put in the bedroom. I forgot about that, but it doesn't matter. It's in there now. And
you had to dynamite the foundation 3 times and put in.
Right. And but I think ultimately, and I think that's why you'll see, like, I think most time when I see writers, they talk about it, they all have different methods and they all have different rules. And I find it's a spectrum of how people do it. And I think that's the main thing my primary advice is find what works for you, because it's real easy, especially when people start out. Who does it? I'm gonna do it exactly like X does it.
Yes.
And then you get stuck. And I think that's the main thing, because again, we all have slightly different techniques and some very different techniques, and we all do it.
I also think
and there's
no, I was
there's
gonna say,
I'm gonna let you go, Peter.
I've got the talking stick. No, what I was gonna say is actually that I think all 3 of you brought up a point, or a connected point between you, that I think the whole thing about our process, and a key thing to remember, I know a lot of people think about that, oh, I wrote 30 pages, you know, I didn't use an outline, and I wrote 30 pages that I'm not going to use. And now it's, so I wasted all that time. But like one of the things I did recently when I did Terminus was I did this massive outline. And I probably spent 4 or 5 weeks on the outline. But on the current book, I spent those 5 weeks writing it. And so, yes, I've gotten to the end and I'm kind of like, oh, this isn't going to work. This has to go away. That's not going to be good. So, you know, I really do believe a lot of it balances out. That I think for most of us, our method, you know, whatever works for us will, you know, you peak here and I peak here, and this is your slow point, this is my slow point, and I put in a lot of work on this end, you put in a lot of work on that end. But like Alex was saying, really all that matters is what comes out, what's the finished product. And I think it is something that overall, I think if you checked with most people who do this with any sort of regularity, I think we're all spending about the same amount of time from beginning to end. It's just, you know, well, you spent 4 weeks outlining and I spent 4 weeks in draft 3, and, you know, this person spent an extra 6 weeks in the first draft. I think it was, crap, I can't remember who it was, but I remember thinking, because I heard Kevin Smith writes this way. I got to interview him once when I used to do magazines, and he does 1 draft. That's it. But he just goes through that draft and massages the hell out of it, page by page by page by page by page. You know, but it's like, okay, so you
Heinlein
only
used
do
to do
1
that
draft,
too.
but that 1 draft takes you 4 months.
Well, even the idea of a draft is very vague, because what is a draft, right? Like, it's like, it's not like you go through it. So it comes from the idea you do it once, and then you have a clear stopping point, and then you go through it again. But really, I mean, like, I'm constantly drafting. I'm constantly, like, whenever I'm writing a book, there's parts that are pretty much finished. That part's going to be in the book. It's finished. It's exactly what I want it to be. And then there's the parts that, like, this is the really rough sketch part. And in between, I mean, it's just. I think even that could be a deceptive term.
Yeah, it's going to be different things for different people, and it's going to play to kind of how we do something best, and also kind of what works for us. It's figuring out what your process is. It reminds, I think, a little bit of like when you're in a beginning art class, and they're like, "Okay, draw the vase." Okay, now you're going to draw the vase with cubism. Okay, now you're going to draw the vase like it's like your Degas. You know, and they go through all the things because one of them might work for someone, but you don't know what's going to work for you, what's going to be really great for you until you've tried all the things. So like in a beginning writing class, a lot of times they're like, all right, try writing like Hemingway. Okay, now try writing like Zora Neale Hurston. Okay, now try writing like this person. Because it is kind of like trying on new pants. Eventually something's going to work for you. You're like, ooh, this worked. I'm going to kind of develop it and work on it. It's going to be part of my style now. And this is the thing that's really working for me. But you don't know what that is until you've tried 50 different things or 50 different approaches, or you've rewritten yourself 5,000 times. And it's the same thing with a process. Like you might write one book like this and one book like this, and you're like, oh, that worked better. And then you try another way and you're like, oh, that worked even better. Oh, that didn't work at all. But you don't really know what that method's going to be until you really kind of say, hey, this works with how I write, what my process is, what my thought process is. You know, some people have to write that 50 pages that they throw away because they had that 50 pages let them discover something about a character. Or be like, oh, this magic will not work. You know, something like that. Yeah. They need that 50 pages. And if you needed that 50 pages, then even if it ended up in the trash, it's not like it's wasted time.
Right.
You needed it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's kind of like the idea of how do you define productivity? So if it's, you know, people will sometimes get militant about this idea of productivity, where if you don't do 50,000 pages, you know, 50,000 words in a month, then you're not productive.
Yeah.
And, you know, it comes down to, well, you could sit there and do 500 words in, you know, a month or a week, and that could be incredibly productive if all of it ends up in your novel and it gets you further, if it solves problems, if it gets you thinking. But having said that, 50,000 words, if it's really working for you, if that's how you work something out and it never ends up in the book, well, great, it got you somewhere. That's productive.
Yeah, it's like the people who say you got to write every day. For some people, that works great. For other people, they need to spend a couple days thinking before they can sit down and do a writing session.
It can also create a failure state, because if you have to write every day and then you find you don't write, suddenly you're like, oh, I'm not doing it properly. And then suddenly you stop. And anything that gets in your way and stops you, even well-meaning stuff. I mean, that's why like this outline stuff can be a problem, because I've known writers that would be like, well, I want to write, but I don't want to sit there and outline everything. And I'm like, well, you don't have to. But then the other end is somebody like, well, you know, this other guy never does outline, so I'm not going to do it. Like, it's about setting goals that you can achieve. And it's not just unique to writing. That's everything in life. It's like, if you create a failure state and then it just makes you not want to do it.
Yeah, I think that's just it. I think a lot of people will hear, oh, so-and-so, Alex Martinez never uses outline. I'm not going to use an outline. And Brennan always uses outlines. I'm going to use an outline. And they keep trying these systems that aren't for them, and they don't work. And rather than just admitting they don't work for me, they try to, oh, well, I guess I just suck at this.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Let me ask you
rather
guys,
than saying that different methods for different people. I mean, our books all look pretty in their bindings when they're on the bookcase. Like I'd say probably fewer than 10% of the books on the bookcase probably had similar paths.
Mm-hmm.
They all look the same when they're on, when they're in Barnes and Noble, but it's like, very different processes led to that finished product.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you guys, since this is part of the question too, and again, admitting this is probably, I know for me, it's different every time. It probably is for you too. Do you have like a regular way that you begin? Like what convinces you that you're starting a book? Like how far do you have to get into that random idea, that random spark, before you finally realize I'm writing a book now?
Oh yeah, committing to an idea can be really hard, because the thing is sometimes you have so many good ideas where you're like, ooh, I could do that, or ooh, I could do that. And when you commit to it, you're really committing a lot of time and energy to it. So sometimes you can have just a lot of really enticing prospects, but you're just like, I don't know. Maybe this one doesn't have enough to it yet. So yeah, it can be really hard to decide which one to do.
Well, right, and again, it's not like it's a solid answer. I mean, for me, I find if I've written like 50 pages, I usually am enamored enough of the idea that probably it's a book. That's not always true. Some things I've written that I kind of write on the side because it's just like a side thing. Like, oh, I don't want to write this today. Let me write this little project I'm working on, and that might develop into a book. But I kind of know it's just a project I'm going where I want. For me, though, but if I've gotten probably 50 pages into it, I'm usually solid enough that I think there's there to go, and I feel like I've committed to a book. Because usually I don't even write 2 chapters of something I'm not really that committed to. So that's just for me, for what it's worth.
I make notes of each idea, and they kind of have their own little piles, and eventually one pile might just be getting taller and taller and taller and taller. And I realize I just really, really want to commit to it finally and write it. And then I take all the notes, and then I start really breaking the outline. But I usually, there are a couple piles that have just been piling up for years, and it's just like, I'm going to write you one of these days. It's just not today.
I'll kind of have ideas mulling around in my head, and it'll be different concepts or things I see and just bits of inspiration. And eventually I'll get a character. I tend to write first person narrative. And so because of that, I tend to create a character who's going to tell this story. And once I get an idea, I write 2 chapters. So I'll write a couple of chapters, 2 to 3 chapters. And I know I've got a book when there's a bunch of points in the novel that are just scenes that have fallen into place, that are things I'm excited to write about. And it could be near the end, it could be in the middle, it could be at the beginning, but they're just scenes. And I won't have even written them yet, but I've already got them laid out, and they're going to get on paper, and then it's figuring out how to connect them. But once I've got the ending, that's when I know I've got an actual novel, because it's not till I have that ending set up and I know either who did it or what I want to be the big reveal at the end. That's when I know.
Yeah, you have to have a plot. You have to have the elements, or at least the understructure of something that'll be a plot, because otherwise you can have an amazing character and a really cool world, but something's got to happen.
It's funny, you talked about having like the pile of ideas, and for me what usually sets it off is I'll have this pile growing up of like this character, this situation, this whatever, and like I think like anybody who tries to write, I think I have dozens of piles, and inevitably at some point for me one of the piles tips over into the other one, And I suddenly realized, wait, if this and this, and, you know, and then suddenly I'm writing about Cthulhu in the Old West or something like that. And I've got, you know, 6 pages of notes to myself about, and then this character could be this, and that character could be this. And what if he was secretly, you know?
Yeah.
And that's when I end up totally excited and I just launch into it. But
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm trying to think of like other things. This, like I said before, this is such a broad question. I'm trying to think of like, you know, and since since it's different for everything about like starting a book, what's a, I don't know, good habit, good belief, good fun.
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer that your first book, you just got to write. Even if it doesn't have a plot, even if it doesn't make sense, even if there's a real big, once you've like finished, because I mean, I don't know about you, but most of the time there's a couple obstacles I see with writers, and a lot of new writers, they don't ever finish anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain psychological hurdle you get through where you're like, I wrote this book, it doesn't make sense. Half the time it goes in weird directions. The plot doesn't pay off, the characters don't pay off, but I finished it and I can finish enough and it can be better. So I think it's important but like as you get like for us, it's not the same thing. We finish books, so it's a different process. You know, after you've done it a couple times, you're like, oh, I can do this. I'll finish this. I know I can. But the first one, I'm a big believer of just like push through, write this thing, accept that it probably won't be very good, but it's really important to get that finished product because at least you can do it. Because not finishing is the big problem. And once you've done it once, if you don't finish something else, it's cool because you can still finish something other thing, but you've got to do it once.
Actually, I think
I really agree with that. I think the psychological element of saying, I have finished a book, I think that's really key. I mean, even if you've written like 5, there's always the point when you're like number 6, when you're like, oh, this is awful. How do I ever finish this? And then you're like, well, I did it 5 times.
this is going to be the last one.
Yeah.
This is going to be the one that ends my career. I think you actually, Alex, you brought up a neat point, because I think another downside to people who are looking online for other authors who talk about, well, I do this today, I write this many pages today. All of us are generally, even if we're not specifically under contract, we have someone kind of waiting for us to finish this.
Yeah.
We have an agent, we have an editor, like we're working under a lot more expectations. Whereas if this is your first novel, oh my God, it's so beautiful and free, and seriously, do whatever.
Yeah.
I remember Scott Sigler talked about at one point that if you're writing your novel, I think I talked about this, Alex has heard me say this before. If you're writing your novel and you get stuck and things aren't working, have aliens invade.
That's right.
No matter what, I don't care what you're doing. Period romance, have aliens invade. Why? Because you've got something else to write about now. Keep writing.
Yeah.
And look at that, you finished your book. Is it all going to work? No, because aliens invaded halfway through. But you finished your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and yeah, psychologically, it's a huge thing to get to do that. That I think I heard at one point that, crap, I'm trying to remember who told me this, but like only 1 out of 100 would-be writers finish something.
I would believe it even higher. I mean, I'd even believe, because the obstacle that, like, if you want to take away the artistry and being good at it, the obstacle that makes us able to do this is we wrote it, we finished it, and we submitted it.
Yes.
Like, those are 3 steps.
Yeah.
I have known so many people who they can't finish because they don't get started. They don't get started, and then when they get started, they don't finish, and then when they finish, they don't submit. And I mean, that's just that. I mean, because I know plenty of great writers that are still struggling and going through the process and doing all the things they can. But I know lots of other interesting people that are like, always wanted to be a writer. I'm like, you're not doing it. You're not doing no one's going to it's very rare for someone to knock on your door and be like, hello, I'm an editor and I would like to publish your book. My car broke down outside your house and I need to read something for 2 hours until.
And right now, a dozen people are thinking, very rare, but it happens.
That's right. Dumb and Dumber. 1 in a
Or
million.
the editor. Yeah. Or the editor or agent who, you know, goes into the washroom and they really, really want you to slide their manuscript, your manuscript under the door so they can read it.
I'm hoping this other guy in the elevator has a book.
Yeah, but I mean, also, how many of us have been at conventions or signings or whatever, and someone comes up to us and is like, "I've got a great idea for a book.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell it to you," and then you're trapped for 10
Because
minutes.
they're protecting it, or they're protecting it because they
yeah.
don't want somebody to take their idea because it's so good and original.
Oh, and it's just like, dude, it doesn't matter until it's a book. I don't care if Guinevere is now Arthur.
Well, one of my
or whatever.
One of my favorites was like in real life. It was like I had this really killer idea.
Lovecraft in Camelot.
That's right. Oh, there you go. Well, you just did it. Oh no, you just gave that idea away. Now I was never going to write it. No, yeah, it's interesting because again, I think it's the we don't talk about this a lot. We talk about it. Writers talk about it a lot, but like outside of that, there's a lot of people have this sort of glamorous. But at the end of the day, it's a job. You do the job, and it's easy to get excited about like the idea or the romance of it. But it's like. And even in fiction, and we're guilty of this. I mean, so many books about writer characters is the character struggling because he can't come up with his idea, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I've got my idea, and then he writes it in a weekend and gets $1 million, and it's like because I get it because it's just like in fiction, firefighters have more exciting lives, everybody has a more exciting life in fiction. Accountants have more exciting lives than but like it's just such an interesting idea because that's the struggle is like. Sit your butt in the chair and write. Like I'm behind on my book. I'm behind on my book because I'm plugged in my chair and write. That's why. It's not because I was like, oh, well, the idea, I just didn't feel it. Bull. Get in there, do it.
Yeah. It's the grunt work that's just so hard. I mean, ideas are almost kind of the really easy part because it's just like you can come up with an amazing idea in the shower and be like, oh, there's a whole world. There's a whole idea. And it's just like if it's but if you don't sit there and really just grind it out, it's not going to happen. And then it doesn't really matter how amazing your idea was. But yeah, I think we all like the wish fulfillment of, one idea and it would be great.
Yeah.
It is wish fulfillment. And writers are kind of the most boring people because we just sit around in our pajamas a lot, which does not look as good on like Sex and the City or whatever if it had been an actual writer.
I'm just saying Murder, She Wrote. I love Murder, She Wrote, but nobody's asking like in real life to solve murders. Also, everyone's read her books, and that's bull. That is bull. That's the fantasy element. Like I have no problem with Jessica Fletcher solving murders. I have a problem with people being like, oh, I know, I've read your book. Really, everybody's read your book. No.
I think the best show about a writer I've ever seen was an old like one season show on I think it was WB called Glory Days, and the main character is a writer who writes this thinly fictionalized version story about his hometown, and now it's like 5 years later and he has to go home and everybody in the town hates him because like there's this whole murder element to it, but honestly it's like my favorite part was just all that, him having to deal with all the people who's like, you told everyone I was gay just because I cried in Top Gun. Anyway, we have like, I think like 7 minutes left on this thing. Does anyone have what? Last cool ideas or a piece of advice for someone who's starting their first novel. Kristi, go.
Oh, my turn. God damn it.
You're on the spot.
I'm on the spot. My biggest piece of advice is take all the advice you get with a grain of salt. And if somebody tells you you have to do something this way and this is the right way, run quickly, because I would be very suspect they're really an author. It's really easy to give out rules, and writing's one of those careers that has none.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece. I'll follow it up by saying, also pay attention to yourself, because as you learn what you're doing, you'll change too. Different methods that might have worked before don't work again later on. Don't be afraid to, don't get so stuck in your own like patterns that when they change, you don't accept it. But I definitely think at the end of the day, it's that listen to all you want, but if it's stopping you from doing your job, doing the writing, creating, don't do it. And I think, and you're right, anybody who tells you this is exactly how you're supposed to do it, I don't care, even if they've sold 1 billion books, don't listen to them if they're stopping you, because that's, again, I've never seen two authors that have exactly the same process. We all we're on spectrums of, we're close to each other, but we're not exactly the same. So, find what works.
Yeah, I completely agree. Both of those are great. I mean, yeah, and you have to remember that when it comes down to writing, I mean, what you have to figure out is how is it going to work for you to fill a page, to complete a chapter, to complete a section, to ultimately complete the book. So you have to really kind of look at what are the things that are actually going to work for you to do these things. And you can try different things. That's great. That's part of the learning process. But you can't force a method to work. If it's not working, you need to figure something else out. Because what really matters at the end of the day is, can you complete a book? Assuming you're doing this in a professional sense and not in a, this is my favorite hobby sense.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. I mean, if you're doing it for your hobby, hey, it's cool. Do what you want. I mean, do what you want.
Yeah, we got to throw an asterisk on that one.
Yeah.
I tell people that all the time. If you're just writing, because you want an awesome dream journal, do whatever you want. I think my big piece of advice would be, don't worry about how long this is taking. If this is your pace, then it's your pace. Because I know there are writers out there who are saying, like, I wrote 9,000 words today in a word sprint in 1 hour. And you have that pressure. You've got the pressure of, like, I mean, let's be honest, there are people on Amazon who are putting out like a book a week, a book a week, churning things out. And I think there's just a ton of pressure on aspiring writers, on upcoming writers, to just put stuff out as fast as possible. Yeah. And look, if you're not a fast writer, don't worry about it. Writing, you've probably, I'm guessing, anyone watching this, you've probably got a life. If you're not writing full-time already, it probably means you have another full-time job. Yeah. You've got a family, you've got a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. You've got something else that needs a certain amount of your time. So don't beat yourself up that you only get an hour to write every day and you didn't do 7,000 words in that. So if it takes you 6 months, if it takes you a year, then it took you a year, but you finished your book. So cool.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.